Whether it is accepted by all people is another issue, but it has the ability to be offered and therefore accepted by all people. Otherwise, the offer seems a little silly.
Right.
And we already talked about some of these scriptures in a previous discussion about, Jesus, when he's lifted up on that cross, he will draw all people to himself, etc. So there are some suggestions that people can respond and have the free will to respond to the message of salvation. Now, one other thing I want to say about this is that from a Calvinist perspective and an Arminian perspective, both respect the idea of free will and both respect the idea of God's sovereignty. So a Calvinist might say something similar to this, and I don't want to oversimplify it, but for purposes of time, is that if free will is the ability to do what you want is to reject God, and so you will do the thing you want.
Right.
So that if God changes your ability or your desire so that you choose him, you do what you want. So that is, in a sense, free will, even from their perspective. I think that is a little different than an Armenian might look at it and say, well, free will is the ability to choose something other than the choice you want someone to make. So I think that there's a bit of a mystery there, but both views would say that people are doing what they want to do. And so if free will is the ability to do what you want, then both would say that we actually do have the ability to respond to God. It depends on what is the impetus for that ability to choose.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, there's tons of passages we could go through showing
God blinds
free will. Right.
To the truth sometimes. He gives them over. He doesn't blind them in terms of it. God keeps them from seeing the truth, but God gives them over to the depravity of their minds and gives them over to a strong delusion.
Right.
This is something that you said earlier. You go away from God to a certain point to where you're no longer seeing him. Not because he doesn't want to be seen, but because he gives you the respect to be able to walk away, and now you have completely gone out of the line of sight of God. You can return, and he can return to you if you want, but he's going to respect that.
Yeah. Yeah. And even though he is, he is clearly sovereign, omniscient.
Yes.
There's all those texts as well. There are just all of these things so even when something bad happens, it's not like in the scriptures, it's always like God ordained this because no one had any choice in the matter. The parable of the weeds essentially ends with Jesus, or the figure there looking at the weeds among the tares and saying that, the wheat in the tares, saying, oh, look, he says, an enemy has done this. An enemy has done this. These sort of figures rising up in the church that an enemy has done this. It's not that God is doing this. And Paul talked about the God of this age, the devil, blinding people also, but that we can give into that. We can stop resisting the devil. We can start resisting God. That there is this level in which God is in charge. There's even the sort of the classic example of, Paul writes in Philippians 2, therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you to will and act in order to fulfill his good purpose. So there is in some sense both going on, that God is willing and acting in you, and yet you have to cooperate, participate in that willing and acting. It's like what we talked about before, the archer. God is there, but you can rip yourself away if you don't want to go God's way. He won't force you, but he will guide you very well if you let him.
And this goes into something that, I'm not dogmatic on this, but it does appeal to me as a way to sort of not resolve, but approximate a resolution of God's sovereignty and human free will when it comes to the salvation question, is this idea of Molinism and middle knowledge. Is that the idea, and this is going to be a simplified version of this, that God knows what you will do and he knows what you would do. So it's important to understand the distinction here. God knows what you will do, and that God has perfect knowledge of the future. He knows it's true that you will do this thing. But God knows that if these circumstances pertain based on his knowledge of you and his perfect knowledge of counterfactuals. He knows that if this were the circumstances, you would do this thing of your own free will. So in his sovereignty, if he wants this outcome to happen, he can manipulate the world such that these circumstances will arise so that when they happen, you will freely choose to do this thing he wants you to do. He didn't make you do it in a directive will kind of a way. It was more of a hybrid between his directive will and his permissive will. It was his will that you do this of your own free will. And he makes it so that you will choose that of your own free will. And you could have chosen another way, but because your free will, he knows what you would do. So the analogy I've given before is, and I want to modify it slightly, is, let's say, you and I are roommates, and you're training for something. You're training for a marathon, and you happen to have a raging sweet tooth. Why are you smiling?
Well, one of those things is true.
You have raging sweet tooth? I do too. But let's say I went to a restaurant before that gave you one of these ridiculous chocolate cakes.
Decadent.
Yeah, the death by chocolate or whatever it is. And I couldn't eat the whole thing, and I sliced it in half, and I put a piece of it in the freezer. It's an ice cream cake that's like, oh my goodness, come on. And you know that. And I saved it. I don't really care if I eat it or not. And you come in from training, and I know that if you see it on the table, you'll probably eat it. So it's in the freezer, and you struggle, and you struggle, and you struggle. And you're, should I eat it? Should I not? Should I eat it? Should I not? And you decide not to. You take a shower, go to bed. You've overcome the temptation. Little did you know, I actually threw it away. You couldn't have possibly eaten it if you wanted to.
Right.
But you freely chose not to eat it. Just because you couldn't have eaten it doesn't mean you didn't freely choose to not eat it. You freely chose not to eat it. No one made you not open the refrigerator, but you couldn't have done it even if you wanted to.
Right.
So my sovereignty over the chocolate cake in that instance was exercised, and your free will in that moment was still exercised. Just because God is sovereign doesn't mean we don't have free will. And you see this in the parable of the generous employer in Matthew chapter 20. Is that the generous employer goes and he sees various workers out in the field, and he hires the first guys and says they negotiate, and he pays them a denarius for the day's labor. But he hires day laborers with only an hour left of work, and he pays them the same amount of money he was going to pay the first guys for only 1 hour of work. So the first guys worked the whole day for a denarius. The last guys worked 1 hour of work for the whole day, 1 hour of work the whole day, and got paid the denarius. So they got paid equal for far less work. And the first guys see it, and they're mad, and they say, hey, you owe us more money. And the master of the vineyard, who is God in the parable, says, friend, I have done you no wrong. Can't I do with my money what I want? It's God's sovereignty. And didn't you negotiate for 1 denarius? Human free will. So they negotiated in this whole thing, but in God in his sovereignty sees all this. And the plan is being worked. So I do think that human beings have free will. But I also think that God is sovereign. And though the dance of the mystery there sometimes escapes us, but logically speaking, they can both coexist.
Right.